Hey everyone, what's up? Marcelo Vieira here, and today I'm here to talk about my newest course, much awaited by my students, about plugin development. No kidding, I lost count of how many times I have been gently approached by my students asking me to create a course on the subject. Well, there you have it. The course is ready and today I came here to talk about it. First of all, if you are new here, don't forget to give your thumbs up because I'm sure you like the video. Subscribe to the channel and click on the bell icon so you don't miss the new videos. In this video here, I wanted to bring the first lessons of this course, now available on Udemy in its full form. Here I will bring the first hours of a 15-hour course with about 100 lessons. But you can already enroll using the exclusive discount coupon that is available in the video description. In this new course, I'll share everything I've been learning during these 10 years I've been working with WordPress, without hiding anything in an extremely didactic way as it's usual in my courses. Ask those who already know my courses. The plugin development course is organized into 3 projects, which increase in complexity as you follow the lessons. It might not seem like much, 3 projects, but they will be enough to cover most of the subjects that refer to plugin creation, from the most basic functions to the most complex classes. The idea is that you use each of the projects not as a final product that you can install on your client's site, but as a starting point for your own studies. You'll build with me the projects of each plugin and you'll be able to use them later to add more functionality, refine the code, and make it more flexible, you name it. All this using only the native WordPress tools. No using plugins to create another plugin, no such thing. You'll learn about things such as how to create WordPress action hooks and filters to your advantage to control the behavior of plugins and make them more flexible. How to organize your projects in a cleaner and more flexible way using PHP classes and objects. How to use the main native WordPress APIs, classes, and functions to create your plugin. For example, the APIs, settings, options, widgets, shortcode, meta box, and the methods of the very powerful WP class. How to create custom post types, also known as CPTs, making WordPress the perfect framework for any project you want to create. How to create your own taxonomies, custom menus, option pages, your own widgets and shortcodes with various options, meta boxes with custom fields. How to add style sheets and JavaScript in both the admin and front end and control them via the options page. How to install and predict what to do when installing, deactivating, and uninstalling the plugin. How to control the plugin's templates in the front end, and also how to create a template override system similar to that of WooCommerce. How to create a specific theme support for your plugin. And that's not all, because in the course, we will also learn how to perform all CRUD actions, create, read, update, and delete data on your own custom table using the super powerful WP class. Have you ever thought of leaving the limitations that the WordPress system imposes on you and organizing your project based on a separate table? In this course, we will learn how to do this, understand in which cases this is necessary and what are the pros and cons. You also learn how to use the front end to let the user submit data to this custom table. How about that? And there's much more in this course. It is really fantastic. Just for you to get a taste of it, I will bring the first lessons for you to follow, starting now. Hello and welcome back. So before we start getting our hands dirty, I want to talk about some aspects of this course, the classes that you watch, the tools that you'll be using here in this course. I know it may sound a little bit boring, but I want to anticipate some questions my students always ask me. I've been creating courses for a while now, and I wanted to avoid answering these questions all the time, as I know these questions will eventually come up, so let's go and talk about them. So first, I would like to talk about some things that I hope you have already set up on your machine in order to start the course. As this course is a little more advanced, it will require a little bit more effort from students, and I make this very clear in the introduction video and in the course's landing page. I decided not to record videos with basic level explanations here, okay? For example, teaching how to install WordPress, how to install a local server, how to use PHP admin, etc. So if you're taking this course and you don't have any idea of how these things work, don't even know how to install WordPress, don't have your local server up and running, etc., that's the wrong way to start. So I suggest that you first build a more solid base on web development and then you come back here to this course, right? Otherwise, you will struggle a bit to follow the material, and it won't be my fault because the prerequisites for this course are pretty clear, right? So first of all, you must already have WordPress installed, preferably in its latest version. So you can do a test installation of WordPress, or you can use any installation you have available because the project we'll build in this course will not depend on the installation itself. For the local server, you can use anything you like. In my case, I'm using XAMPP with Apache, MySQL. My PHP is on version 7.4. I haven't installed version 8 yet, but if you have version 8, although I haven't tested, I think the codes I'm going to use here will run smoothly with no problems. Anyway, I'll try not to use too many specific features, too many new features and stuff like that. So any newer PHP version will work okay. Also, another question I'm always asked, Marcelo, which IDE do you use? Can I use any IDE or code editor? So of course you can. Go with the one you feel more comfortable with, okay? I myself, until the last year, I used only Sublime Text 3. But since the end of 2020, I decided to migrate all to VS Code. And I don't know why in this world I took so long to start using VS Code, because it is really awesome. So this is the IDE I will use here in this course, okay? If you have it around, you can use it. If you don't have it, I recommend that you install it, but you can use whatever IDE you want. And what extensions do I use in my VS Code? So before you ask me which extension does this or that, just take a look at my little list of extensions here, okay? If you're interested, if you see some cool feature being used here in the course and you want to use it too, just come back here to this video and check it out. I'm not going to give you support about the extensions I used in this IDE, okay? So if you have any questions about the use of any of them, just do a little search on Google, okay? The only extension here that I really think it's essential is this one here, the PHP IntelliSense. This extension will give you much faster access to the WordPress Core to, for example, see what parameters a function can take, what is the return type of these functions, and so on and so forth. Just hover the mouse over the function's name to see a list of parameters. If you press Ctrl or Command on a Mac while you hover the mouse over the function name, you can go straight to it. And here you can see more details. In this course, I will leave almost no reference links to WordPress functions because you can do that using VS Code. So one more reason for you to install this IDE to work with WordPress. Another thing this extension does is it gives you hints about the function's signature while you code. Check it out. This makes the developer's life a lot easier. See? Very useful here, right? Remember, you can also find all the documentation about WordPress functions on the developer's reference page. So I'll leave you the link in the extra material for this class. But I recommend that you go ahead and bookmark this page in your browser because you can use it a lot. As I said, I'm not going to provide the link to the docs for all the functions that we're going to use here in this course. So you can find them all by doing a quick search on this page, all right? Still talking about documentation, I would like to make one thing very clear here in this class.
most of the code that we'll write in this course will not be documented, okay? What I mean by this is that I'm not going to stop the video just to write comments in my code, okay? So what I recommend is that you study and document the code snippets yourself so you don't forget what they do. I know and I understand very well the importance of writing documentation, but as the projects I will show you will not leave this course, they will not be available elsewhere, I will not make a point of documenting anything, okay? A very nice VS Code extension that can help you do that, if you're interested, is the Php Doc Blocker. This one I'm showing here. Some more tips to finish. Always write your code with the WordPress debug mode on, okay? This will help you see clearer messages, error messages in this case, on the screen while you develop. To do this, you can go to the wp-config.php file, this little guy here. And here in this constant called wp debug, you just need to change the value from false to true. It is vital that you always develop in WordPress using debug mode on, okay? Other things that help a lot are two PHP commands called Var Dump and Print R. They will always be your best friends also in the plugin development process or even theme development. So in the course, we will use Var Dump sometimes to see content of arrays and understand how to use their values. And I think most of you know these guys. But as I have students from various levels of knowledge, it cannot be mentioned enough. Still talking about debugging, there are some plugins that, they help you develop plugins. And I'll talk about some of them here. Some of them we will be installing during the course, others will not be installed. The first one is called Debug Bar. It is a very complete plugin which also has several add-ons that you can use to debug code, analyze the execution of filters, action hooks, queries. It also has an integrated console. It is very, very versatile. You see it. We also have this simply show hooks, which shows filters and action hooks running on a given page. There's also this show current template, which shows the template files being loaded on a page, and also some additional files loaded. And then there is this one, query monitor, which shows all the queries being executed on a given page. All these tools will help you create code for your plugins much better and much faster. Another tip about things that can help you, there's a site called hotexamples.com. I will leave the link in the extra material too. This one is very useful for you to better understand the context of use of some WordPress functions inside the plugins. So I've used it a few times already. Just put the function name here. And it will look for the function as it is used inside several projects. Check it out. Another thing I used to do is look inside the WordPress plugins folder itself. So here I have the plugins folder. With VS Code, I use this option called Find in Folder. And I can find examples of use for some code that I have doubts about how to use them. Of course, you must have some plugins available in your WordPress. For example, let's suppose you see a cool feature being used in a plugin and you don't know how to implement it. I think it will help a lot to look at other developers' code. For me, it is always very helpful. And finally, all the projects developed in this course are on GitHub. The address is also there in the extra material of this lecture. All the projects are open source, alright? So if you think you want to use any of them as a base for your own work, or even if you want to improve any of these projects and create another plugin from them, feel free to do so. So no need to ask my permission, okay? Although a mention is always welcome. Alright then folks, thanks for sticking around. I hope you enjoy the material and see you in next video. Hello! Before we start our course for real, there is one subject that I think it's very important to discuss: hooks. This is a subject that will be present throughout the whole course from start to finish. We're going to be adding actions or adding filters in our plugins most of the time, so it is essential that you know what we are going to be doing. I made sure to include these lessons here at the beginning so that I wouldn't need to stop and spell it out again and again in the course, because I have to explain this one way or the other. So I thought it will be more useful to have it here at the beginning. If you already know what are action hooks and how they work, you can skip these lectures and go straight to the next section of the course. But if you don't, or if you do but want to know a little bit more, then stick around for the next 3 lessons. Well, hooks are nothing more than specific locations within the WordPress code where it will let you execute an additional piece of code, a function, let's say, or modify existing content. They are part of the magic of WordPress in the sense that they allow you to make WordPress behave in a different way than it was meant to behave. And they are the basis of plugin creation, since that's what plugins are made for. I mean, they are designed to modify the way WordPress behaves and perform a task it was not initially created for. According to the WordPress Docs, there are 2 types of hooks. The first are called action hooks, and the other type of hooks are called filters. To use either of these, you need to write a function, which we call a callback function, and register that function for use in a specific action hook or filter. In WordPress, we say that these callback functions are triggered or fired within an action hook or a filter. But we will see this in practice later, okay? So what is the difference between an action hook and a filter? The main difference is that an action hook is used to add something at a certain point in the WordPress code execution. For example, there is an action hook called WP Enqueue Script, which is widely used both in theme and plugin creation. It is used to add both CSS and JavaScript files to the header of the web page of a WordPress site. In WordPress, by the way, you don't add the CSS and JavaScript manually in the HTML head, okay? But you always use an action hook to do this. One more example. There's an action hook called save_post, which we use a lot here in this course. And it is nothing more than a certain moment of WordPress execution, right? A specific point of it that allows you to write a function that will then save some information in the database. And later we'll understand more precisely what I mean when I say certain moments or specific points in the code execution, okay? On the other hand, filters are different beasts altogether, because they are used to modify some information that already exists in WordPress. In fact, a very good explanation tells us that filters, they hijack some kind of information from WordPress and then give us back the same information, but modified. In some cases, they can also do this hijacking and simply not give us anything back. That is, make that information completely vanish. For example, when WordPress creates the code for the content function, which is responsible for taking everything that is inside that content area of the post editor or that one of the page editor, this one here, and displaying it on the screen, it also lets you use a filter to modify that information. You can hijack all this content and do some interesting things with it. For example, let's say you want to add copyright info after every post on your site. You can create a filter that returns the full post content, and at the end of it, it spits out the copyright information, right? You get it? You've taken a content that has been generated by the content function and then applied another function, a filter in this case, to modify it. In terms of programming, the main difference between action hooks and filters is that hook only execute some additional code. They don't return anything to the function that called it. You could say that they interrupt the flow of the code at a certain point, perform some action, and then exit, but without modifying anything, without changing any existing information. Filters, on the other hand, are required to return something back to the function that called it. Generally, we pass a variable as parameter to a filter, and the goal is to return this variable back, but modify it in some way. And that's why they have this name, filters. They simply take this information and apply a filter. That is, they modify this information. And sometimes during this process, more stuff can come along with that information, and sometimes less stuff. And sometimes there's nothing left of the original information. So if you write a function, a filter function without returning anything, you are doing it wrong, okay? Likewise, if you write a callback function for an action hook returning something, that is also wrong. Natively, WordPress already comes with a plethora of action hooks and filters, but you can also create your own if you want. This helps you, for example, to make your plugin more flexible, like you're giving a developer the chance to modify the way your plugin works later on. This happens a lot with large plugins such as WooCommerce, for example, but you'll see this later in this course. For now, what matters is to understand how to work with the hooks that WordPress provides. Well, to better understand and to better explain the subject that seems sometimes very abstract, but in a visual way, I often use a plugin called Simply Show Hooks. By the way, you don't need to install it, okay? Just follow my explanation here. What this plugin does is add a new menu item here in the WordPress admin bar, both in the admin, the back end, and the front end. And if I click here on Show Action Hooks, just look what will happen. Check it out. A bunch of items pop up here on the screen. Each of these items is an action hook, and most of them will appear here in more or less the order in which they are present in the WordPress code. If you want to see exactly what order the hooks and filters are executed, just install the Debug Bar Plugin, the one I talked about in the previous lesson, and its extension called Debug Bar Actions and Filters add-on. Then you see something more or less like this. Let me just come back here. I mean, this guy's here. So here you can see all the filters and hooks, in this case the action hooks to be more precise, that are running in this page, more or less in the order they are fired. Here are the action hooks, and here we have the filters. The amount of hooks available varies according to the plugins and the themes you have installed, because they can also have their own hooks, as explained previously. Let me go back to the front end. So in this list here, we have this first hook called Plugin Loaded, and then Plugins Loaded. Some are light green in color, others are dark green and have this number on the side. And if I hover the mouse over them, I can see the names of the functions that are being fired on this particular action hook. The amount of functions, so to speak, hanging here also depends on your WordPress installation, on the plugins and themes that you have available at the moment. This will vary, okay? Now let me choose one here, which is one of the most used in WordPress, to show you guys something. This one, the WP Enqueue Script that I also mentioned in the beginning of this video. Look how many functions hanging here. This is because many plugins and themes have their own style sheets and JavaScript files, and they use this hook to add these files. Later on, if you are curious enough to look for some of these functions in the WordPress files, you'll see what I'm talking about. But one interesting thing here is that all the hooked functions also appear in a given sequence inside the hook. This is controlled through a sequential number that is called a priority by WordPress. So we have functions here fired with priority 10, 1000, this high priority here. There are also others here we can see with priority 0. And later we'll see this in practice, okay? But you should know that 10 is the default priority. I mean, the one used when you don't enter a priority value in your function. And 0 is the maximum priority. So the higher the number, the lower the priority. A practical example of this that we use later in this course, I can write, for example, a function that adds style sheets to the WordPress front end, except that I want it to be added right after any other style sheet. Let's say I want to make sure that whatever rule I put into the CSS file will override every single CSS rule I have on the entire website. So instead of using exclamation important all the time, I can set a very low priority on the function. And this will cause it to be added to the end of the queue. Since CSS cascades, the CSS rules that I put in this file will have a priority over all the others. You got it? Well, don't worry too much about it if it's not clear, because we are still gonna see this in practice. Well, to turn it off, here I'm gonna click here on Stop Showing Hooks. And now I can come back here to the menu and choose Show Action and Filter Hooks. And now here in pink and darker red, I see the filter type hooks loaded for this page. Here is the same thing, right? If I hover my mouse over, look at that. I see which functions are being used to filter some content within my WordPress installation. For example, let me look for the content function here. Well, here I see that all these functions here are filtering out content generated by the content function. Most of these are WordPress filters. For example, with priority 10, I have this function called WP AutoP. And what this filter does is it grabs all the content within the WordPress editor, and wherever there are double line breaks, it will replace them with an empty HTML paragraph tag, hence the name AutoP. Get it? Also, by default, any text that you enter there in the editor, if you do a line break using the Enter key, this filter will turn it into BR tags. All right? And that's how WordPress formats the content coming from the editor. The filter hijacks the editor content that is generated by the content function, then modifies the content using WP AutoP, and then returns the content already filtered out. Alright? I think this lesson was pretty clear. And in the next one, I will give you some practical examples of action hooks. So see you there. Hi guys! In this lesson, I would like to show you practical examples of use for action hooks. They are very simple things, okay? Nothing so fancy. The goal is just for you to understand how they work, and so you don't get lost in the explanation when we're creating the plugins. So let's start. Just remembering that the examples I'm gonna give you here are functions that take effect on the front end. But you can do the same thing with action hooks in the WordPress admin, okay? We'll do this a lot when creating the plugins, but now to be more practical, let's just stay on the front end. Another thing is that I'm gonna apply all my examples in the code of a theme, but keep in mind that you can and should do this also within the code of some plugin, alright? The first thing you have to know is that action hooks only work because of two functions that complete each other. The first one is do action, and the other one is add action. The first one, do underline action, it sets an action hook anywhere in the WordPress code. So if you open up the WP settings PHP file, for example, and look here for do underscore action, you already have some of them here. For example, remember the plugin loaded and plugins loaded hooks, which I showed you in the previous lecture? So it's right here at those points, which are in one of the first files loaded by WordPress, that they're being defined. All this has logic, okay? These do action calls are not scattered in the code randomly. For example, the action hooks related to the presentation of the theme. First, there's a do action called setup theme. Let me see if I find it here. So here it is. WordPress uses this hook in case the developer wants to perform any action before the theme loads. And then there's the after setup theme also. So here it is. This one is available after the theme is fully loaded. At this point, the theme's functions.php file is also available, and you can use this hook to create menus, load translation files for the theme, add various types of theme support, etc. If you try to attach those actions to the setup theme hook, it won't work because it's too early in the code, and for example, the functions.php file won't even be available. By the way, I left a link there in the extra course materials so you can see what the WordPress loading flow looks like step by step. I think it's worth a look to learn more about how the CMS, how WordPress works. Well, but going back here to the explanation, the second function related to the action hook is add action. And this function will help you hook your callback functions, okay? So you can say that do action is the point in the code where the hook is available, and the add action is where you will in fact hook your callback functions. Let me give you a practical example. For that, I'm gonna use that plugin that I installed in the last video, and also the functions.php file of anything. For example, I'm gonna use the 2019 here. I'm going to open the post called Hello World, this one here. And I'm going to activate the plugin and show the action hooks. Here on the front end, you see that at this point where the post content begins, there is a hook called loop start. And at the end of the post, right here at the end, I have the loop end. That is, up here is where the loop that generates the post start, which is, by the way, a while loop. We'll see this in the course in more detail later on. And down here is where the loop ends. And WordPress makes these hooks available here by default, so the developer can perform any actions they want, okay? But it's also worth noticing that this only works for loops made according to the CMS standard. Okay, so I'm gonna go back here to the functions.php file, and I'm gonna paste a ready-made code snippet that I created earlier. Look, you don't have to copy the codes I'm gonna use in this lesson here and in the next one, okay? I'm gonna use them as an illustration only, okay? And they will also not be available in the course material because they are not part of the projects we create here in this course. So for now, just pay attention to what they are doing, okay? So what this code is doing here is adding two actions. First here on the loop start hook, and then on the loop end hook. For that, for each action, I'm using the add action function. The first parameter of this function is the name of the hook, and the second is the name of the callback function that will be fired on it. In this case, these two functions here. So here they are. So you can see here that the first callback does nothing more than add the opening div and a text saying that the loop has started. And the second one is right here. It closes the div with a message saying that the loop has ended. Notice though that these functions are not returning anything. When the hook is available, they will just stop the code, execute this portion of the code here, and this one here, and then return to the code flow where it left off. Now back at the front end, reloading the web page. And of course, it didn't work because we have the wrong theme active here. Let me come back here and choose the correct one this time. The 2019, of course. Now reloading here. You can already see that the content has appeared here. So hovering the mouse over the hook, I see the functions here. And down here too. Well, in fact, here it's not displaying, but I think it's a plugin specific bug. But the complete name of the hook should appear here too, right? the same way we have it up here. If I go ahead and stop the plugin and inspect the code, here you can see the div I created, test div. It opens and closes right here. Activating the plugin again. As we didn't set any priority in the add action, the default priority here is 10. You see it? But I can change this. Let's suppose I want to add a section inside this div I just created, but this time using a different callback function. So let's go to the editor again. I could have code like this. Here I just put priority 10 on the divs that I created before. And I just reordered the code to make it clear what is going on. So here after the function that opens the div with priority 10, I just created another function in the same hook in the loop start, but now with priority 11, as you can see here. And here before the closing div, I closed the section on the same hook in the loop end, but with priority 9 this time, since the other function had priority 10. Remember? Now refreshing the page. Now I have the functions fired in the correct order. And also the content. And let's look at the HTML markup. Look at this. Everything here in the right place. So this is how we set the priority of execution in the action hooks, alright? Well, what if I have two callback functions with the same priority on the same hook? Well, then WordPress will decide based on the order they come in the code, okay? One interesting detail is that you don't have to write the code in this order here. You can place the callback functions later if you want. Like this. See it? First, the add action here, then the callback function. Or even like so. See it? All the add actions down here. Or with the add actions here on top. Doesn't matter, okay? I can position it like this. Either way is fine, okay? In our plugins, we use PHP classes, and you see that many times the add action will be in a very separate place from the callback functions. And finally, there is one last parameter that can be passed to the add action, which is the number of arguments that the callback function can accept. This will vary depending on the action hook being used, alright? I will give you an example, but later in the course. You see, for example, that when we are saving a post in the database, we use a hook called save_post. Since it can also take two arguments, the post ID and the post object itself, we have to indicate this in the code. But this is for later. Well, that's all for this video. In the next lesson, some examples of filters. So, see you then. Hello! Well, now that you know all about the first types of hooks, the action hooks, it's time to talk about filters. Unlike action hooks that don't return any value to the function that calls them, the whole point of a filter function is to get a value and return that value, but in a modified format, or in other words, in a filtered format. This is why they are given this name, filters, okay? Like action hooks, filters work through a pair of functions that work together. The first of these functions is apply filters, and the other is called add filter. The apply filters function is the one that defines a filter within WordPress code. So let's talk about it first, but in a very brief way, because we're going to come back to it at the end of the course. Well, for this, I will show the example of the content function, something I mentioned earlier in this course. If we open up the post template.php file inside the WP includes folder, here near line 243, at least here in my installation, you have the exact part of the code where WordPress defines the content function. Actually, as you can see, it is just a wrapper function for another one called getTheContent. And it's actually used to echo out the result of getTheContent, as you can see here in this code. But notice something interesting here. Before echoing out the value of the content variable, WordPress is passing this value to the apply filters function right here. And this is where the filter is being defined, right? So most filters get at least two parameters. The first is the name of the filter. In this case, it is called the_content, or simply the content. And the second is the value to be filtered out. In this specific case, WordPress is letting us filter the value of the content variable itself. At the end of the story, since what comes here inside this variable is everything we add there in the post editor or the page editor, if that's the case, this code here in practice, it is allowing us to filter the post content itself, okay? You can pass more than one argument to be filtered here. For example, at the end of the function getBodyClass, which defines the list of classes that appear in the body element of all WordPress pages, here about line 836, you have a filter whose name is body_class. It can take two arguments. Both are arrays in this case, as you can see here. The second function that controls the filters is add_filter. This function is for you to modify the value of the filter. To make things easier for you, let's take an example. Once again, we will be going here to the functions.php file, and I will paste a ready-made piece of code. Well, the add_filter function accepts at least two parameters. The first one is the name of the filter. In the case of the content filter, we saw that the name is this one, the _content. So this name here is the same one that we passed to the apply filters, okay? And the second parameter, as ever, is a callback function. In this case, I created a callback function here called modify_content, and I passed its name here. Of course, I could reverse this order here too, okay? So the callback can be anywhere as long as the filter can see it. I already covered this in the previous lecture, so it is the same thing in this case, okay? The most important thing about this callback function is its return. In this case, what I'm saying here is that the callback will receive a value, which I called content, but it could be whatever, for example. And then inside this function, I will modify the value of this variable and return it, but now modified, right? To make it more obvious, I could write this function in a different way, like this, for example. That is, here I am getting the initial value of the filter. I am calling it here content, but it could have another name, okay? Then here inside the callback, I am assigning a new value to this starting value. I'm saying that it will get its own value that will be concatenated with this string here. Then down here, I'm returning the new value. So I return it here again, now filtered out, all right? That's why this is called a filter, because I get the original value here as a parameter, then I modify it here inside the callback function, and then I return it with whatever modification it has, all right? So let's see if it works. Now, if I reload the hello world post, I've got here the original value of the post and the string that I added. Great, isn't it? Now I'm talking about a filter that takes only one parameter. Let me give you an example of a filter with two or more parameters. For example, the body class filter, which I mentioned last time. I could have something like this to add a new class to the body element of all posts. Notice that I'm passing two parameters here. But if I want to work with these two parameters in the callback, I have to necessarily specify that here in the fourth parameter of the add filter. That's why I have this number 2 here, okay? The third parameter is always the priority of the callback function in this filter. And it works pretty much like the priority of the action hooks. Now, the fourth parameter is very important, okay? Because if I ignore this here, look what will happen. So I have this error here on the screen. It says that the filter was expecting 2 arguments, but I just passed 1. That's because I didn't mention here how many parameters I'm giving to the function. Now let me come back here. If I inspect this page again, let me inspect here. Here in the body, I see here the name of the class I passed to the filter, along with all the other that the getBodyClass function automatically generates for me. Here's my class. One interesting thing is that you don't have to pass all the arguments if you don't want to. For example, I could simplify this filter like this. That is, I'm not using this second argument here. Or also like this. Here I'm passing the value of the second parameter with the value of no, and this can be very useful in some situations. Another interesting fact, you should, whenever possible, repeat the name of the filter arguments in the callback function. You don't have to do this, but it helps a lot to make your code more consistent. So here I'm using the same names that the filter defines for me. If I look here, the names are the same. Alright? To close this subject, 2 curiosities. WordPress divides some filter groups in 2. In the first group are those that are applied to information that is read from the database first and then filtered out. And in the second group are those filters that are first applied to some information and later sent to the database. An example from this first group is the content filter itself, because it acts over information that already exists in the database. I mean, you're actually modifying information that already exists and is already stored somewhere in the database. Now there is a filter called Content Save Pre. This allows you to filter the post content, but before it goes into the database. Let me give you an example. For example, this function here, it could be used to replace all line breaks in the post content with closing and opening paragraph tags. And this will be done before the post is saved. The second curiosity is this. WordPress has almost 2,000 filters. That's a lot of them. How do I know which filter I should use and at what point? For example, how do I guess there is a filter called body class that adds class names to the HTML body? Well, you can't guess. A good starting point is the WordPress Core itself. Over time, you'll start to get used to visiting the core files to see how to use the functions. And as you do this, you'll notice that almost always the result of a function can be filtered out. One good indication is the existence of variables that return their value with the use of apply filters. It's that simple. Another thing that helps is the WordPress Docs. This page here that I'm going to show you now, it has a good number of filters that you can use, all divided into categories. Of course, I'll leave this link for you as a reference, okay? Well, I guess that's it. In the next lesson, finally, we'll start creating our plugins. So, see you there. Well, hello there, guys. Welcome to the first lesson of this new section. In this lesson, I'll be explaining how the first plugin that we'll be building here in the course works. In the beginning of every section, I'll be doing the same thing, alright? I'm going to show you a working version of the plugin so that you can get an idea of what you're going to be building. I have to make it clear that the focus here of the plugins is not on design, okay? All plugins will have a minimum of CSS so that the design doesn't get in the way when it comes to understanding how the plugin works. And that's it. Another thing, to demonstrate the plugin, I will use some native WordPress themes. You can choose any theme you like, okay? Just keep in mind that the appearance of the plugin in your theme can be very different from what you see here in the videos. Well, let's get to it then. The name of this first plugin is MV Slider. MV here refers to my name, Marcelo Vieira, but this is just a minor detail, okay? What is this plugin and how does it work? Well, this one is a slideshow plugin. I already used the structure of this slideshow in one of my courses and also in my book, but in this course I want to make the project much more dynamic. Those who already know the project, the slideshow I mean, will see that the difference will be huge. This slideshow is based on FlexSlider 2, that is a project maintained by the same folks that develop WooCommerce. But I could have used another base. For example, I could have used the OWL carousel, the Bootstrap slideshow, or some other one. Just after you understand what is needed for the plugin to work, you can even take this project here and customize it for another type of slider, right? So let's go to the front end. As you can see here on the front end, it has a background image for each slide. It has a title, a description, and they all have a button with a link which you can customize right there in the admin. I added this slideshow here in a post, so it is here in the Hello World post. So it looks small here, but nothing stops you from adding it to a PHP template as well. We'll learn how to do that too. Depending on the theme, it may also display a little bigger, for example here. So here I added a PHP file that controls the homepage of the specific theme. So it's already showing up a little bit bigger. Have a look. This will depend on each theme's limitations. So what does this project have to teach us in terms of plugin development? Well, quite a lot. I will open up the admin here to show you. So the first interesting thing is that it works based on a custom post type. We're going to build this plugin specific menu item. We're going to build submenus as well. And if I jump here into the Manage Slides submenu, I can add as many slides as I want. So in here, if I open this up, I can already edit each slide here in the WordPress block editor structure. And here I have a space for the slide's title. And down below here, a descriptive text as well. And the image that's going to be used for the background of each slide. And then down here, we're going to have two custom fields. We're going to learn how to create, save, and display these fields that are inside this space here called the meta box. And the name of the WordPress API that does this is also called MetaBox. We're going to see everything about it. Now, if I go back here in the slides list table, you'll notice that the value of the MetaBox fields for each slide is also displayed here. We'll also learn how to do this. Another very interesting thing, we're going to learn how to create a settings page for the plugin. What handles this are two WordPress APIs called Settings and Options. So when I click here on the plugin menu, over here or over here, this page will open up. So I can organize the controls into tabs if I want. Here I have a text type control, and here on the other tab, I have other types of controls. Here I can change the slider title. I can decide if I want bullets or not, and the style of the slideshow menu. And I'll show you how these values are saved in the database once I click here on Save Settings, and how to use those saved values to control something on the front end. Of course, taking the information back from the database. So I can mess around here, and then save. And I'll show you the result. See it? Here I already changed how the slideshow looks like. To display the plugin on the front end, we're going to learn how to create a shortcode. So I can, for example, go over here to the post editor. And add a very complete shortcode like this to display the slideshow. We're going to learn how to pass attributes to the shortcode as well. So you can work with a very complete shortcode like this one, passing a specific title and the ideas of the slides you want to be featured in the slideshow. the order in which the slides are displayed. And then you can add later as many attributes as you want just by modifying the code a little bit. You can also add the shortcode to a page. For example, let me open here the sample page of this installation. And you can see here the simpler version of the shortcode, like this. And you get a similar result. Let's also learn how to display the shortcode directly in a PHP template file. Well, what else? Well, we'll also learn how to add style sheets and scripts both in the front end and the back end. Very simple stuff, just to give you a taste of how we can do something a little more complex in future projects. Just remember that the focus here is not CSS, alright? And to finish off, we're going to start learning how to perform some actions that will apply to all the plugins in this course. To be more specific, we're going to learn how to make the plugin ready to be translated into any language, and at the end of the project, we'll learn what is needed to uninstall the plugin. Throughout the project, you'll also learn how some of the tables in the WordPress database work. You get to learn a lot of security notions as well. We're always going to validate fields, sanitize inputs, escape outputs, use nonces. We'll learn what these are if you've never heard of them, nonces. Anyway, this slideshow plugin may seem like a very simple thing, but the number of topics you'll learn while building it will be worth any other course you have taken before this one. And this is only the first of our projects. After this one, the next ones will get a little more complex. You'll leave this course with an excellent notion of how plugins work. Are you ready? Then let's move on to the second lesson in this section. Get your code editor ready and let's go. Hello everyone, let's start creating our plugin. Well, as I already know what the structure of my plugin will be, which directories it will contain and what goes inside each one of them, this will be our starting point. There is no set pattern for these folder names, okay? If you check the plugins you have been downloading, for example, you see that each developer organizes their code in a way that makes more sense to them. But it would be nice to start this job knowing in advance which resources you are going to use so you can put each thing in its place, okay? So let's get started. I will start with the main directory of my plugin. So the right place to create your plugins directory will always be the WP content plugins folder, okay? If it's a very simple plugin consisting of only one file, you can even leave the main plugin file in the root of the plugins folder. An example of this is the Hello Dolly plugin. You just have this file called hello.php here in the plugins folder. In the case of our plugin, we're going to create a folder called mv-slider. So let's create it here. Inside it, I'm going to have the following subfolders. So assets, which is for the CSS resources, images, JavaScript, or any other resources that our plugin needs. Here inside assets, I'm going to create another folder. I will name it CSS. And another one whose name is going to be images, for the images, of course. Another folder that I'm going to create here for the plugin, I'm going to call it functions. This is where I'll be putting my functions files with maybe several different functions in here. Then I'm going to create a folder called languages. This is the folder that will contain the translation files for the plugin. Then another folder here, I will call it post-types, where the file that registers the custom post types of the plugin will be. Later you understand what this is, and in the same file I will register the plugin's metabox too. Later on you understand this better. I'm also going to create another folder called shortcodes, which is going to be used for the shortcode file. One more, I will call it vendor, Here I'll put the third-party files, for example, the Flex Slider 2 files. Also another one called views. As our plugin is going to be class-based, we will try to get a little closer to the MVC coding standard, the model view controller, by creating a separate folder for the plugin's presentation files, which will contain mainly HTML. I will talk about this in more detail later. And that's it. Now to start bringing the plugin to life, I want to create the main file of the plugin, of course. Most often you create this file based on the name of the plugin, the same way we did here for the folder name. So let's call this file mv-slider.php. Let's begin the file with the PHP opening tags. As the file will only contain PHP, we don't need to close the tag, okay? This also avoids those headers already sent problems you have probably seen a lot of times. The first thing this file will contain is a long comment block that is meant to identify some info about the plugin. You only need this block here in this file, okay? You don't need to put it in all the plugin files, right? So I open a comment block here. This is a multi-line comment block, okay? And I'm gonna set the values for a couple of tags in here. The most important one is plugin name. I'm gonna put the plugin name here. It's going to be MV Slider. That's enough for my plugin to show up there in the WordPress admin. So let's see it. So I save it here. Look, my plugin here. I can activate it here if I want to, but of course, it won't do anything. Well, back to the code. Let's add some more tags here. Plugin URI. This is for you to pass a URI, in other words, the plugin's web page. I will pass some kind of fake address here, okay? Let's suppose this plugin was available on WordPress.org. The address will be something like this. Next is description. I will also pass a dummy description for the plugin. Version. Since this is the first version, then I'll pass 1.0. Next is requires at least. Here I pass the WordPress version that this plugin needs to run smoothly. Let's say it works fine as of WordPress 5.6. Notice that here I must always give the number of a major WordPress version. That is the version that has only two numbers, like 5.6, 5.7, and never, for example, 5.6.1, okay? The next one is author. Here I can pass my name. The next one is author URI. Here goes my web page. You better make sure that these two addresses here are not the same, okay? The next two are license and license URI. I will copy and paste it here to make it faster. Here is for the name of the license and the web address where the license text can be read. Generally, all plugins created for WordPress must follow the same license as WordPress itself. In this case, our theme will inherit the WordPress license, which is GPL version 2 or later. And this is the link where you can read more about the license, about the GPL license in this case. If you intend to submit this plugin to WordPress.org, it is highly recommended that your plugin use that license or a GPL compatible one, right? This extends to all other resources used by the plugin, such as third-party files, images, etc. And I will leave a link among the extra materials in this lesson in case you want to know what types of assets you can use in your plugin. That list refers to materials meant for use in themes, but it will give you a good idea of what you can and cannot use. Moving on, the next tag is called text domain. This is to identify the translatable strings in your plugin. Whenever you have a string that has to be translated, you will pass it through a translation function and use this term here as the second parameter. In this case, our text domain will also be mv-slider. Last is the domain path. And this is the path where WordPress will look for translation files. In our case, you see that the files will be in the translations folder, this folder right here. We always pass the name of the folder with a / before it, like this. Alright, well, now I can go back to the plugins table, refreshing it. I see that we got more information about my plugin now. My name is here, the version, the links I passed. Okay, let's go back to the file. Another common thing to put in the main file is a plugin license information. It is not required, okay? If you want to add it, the WordPress Docs will provide a template for you. Most developers use the same text and only change the plugin name on it. I will paste here an example for my license, just for you to see how it is. Of course, I will leave a link in the extra material for you to copy this text if you want. Here, I'm just adding my plugin's name. Here, here, and here. Now, to finish this lesson, I will be adding 2 security items to my plugin. The first item, here in my plugin's root folder, I'm going to create a file called index.php. I can leave this file empty, or I can add some dummy text like this one that many people also use. This ensures that nobody will be able to list my plugin's files directly, using the URL. That's because I only want my plugin to be run and accessed by WordPress and no one else. A very common technique is this one. The second item, on top of that check, we're going to run another check, this time inside the file. And this is also to avoid direct access to the file. To do this, we can check if any of the constants defined by WordPress when it first runs do exist. If they are not defined, you simply exit and leave those who try to access the file directly, so to speak, in the lurch, especially because the plugin file cannot do anything if called directly, right? One of the most used constants is abs_path. We can put it like this. Then, if the file is accessed directly, we simply stop the execution of the script with the exit command. And that is what this piece of code does. You could also, check for some other WordPress function. The Akismet plugin, for example, one of the plugins I have here installed on my WordPress, is a good example. Here it is doing the same thing, but using the add action function. It checks to see if the add action function exists. If it exists, WordPress is installed and it is the one really executing the plugin. Alright, this is one way to check whether the plugin code can be executed or not. You can also do the following. You can add the die command here and send some message to the person who is trying to execute the file directly, like this. So if someone tries to access the file directly, for example, by doing this, so they're going to see this message, right? Let's make it simpler, using only this. So that's it. From here, we can start writing the plugin code in a much safer way. We'll start doing that in the next lesson. So see you then. Hi folks, I hope you're enjoying the course so far. Man, there's a lot of cool stuff for us to see yet. So let's get going. First, however, I want to talk a little bit more about the structure of this project and the other ones we'll be creating in this course. In this plugin and in the next ones, I will try my best to be as close as possible to the Mvc Architecture Pattern. I will not explain what this is, but I think most of you taking this course should know what it is. In short, what I would try to do here is separate as much as possible the responsibilities of each file in our plugin. In particular, I will try to separate what is code used in the WordPress front end and what is code used in the WordPress admin. That's why we created this folder here called Views. Of course, the MVC pattern is much more comprehensive than that. So I said that I would try to do this as much as possible, okay? But due to my own limitations as a programmer, I will not always be able to follow the pattern to the letter, okay? So we're gonna start by making a very important choice. And due to that choice, most of the PHP files of our plugins are going to be class-based. That is, we're going to use object-oriented PHP all the time here in the course because the classes will need to be instantiated and then used. These classes will have their attributes, they will have their constructor methods, their own methods, etc. Everything that's available in object-oriented PHP. If you didn't pay attention to the course description and to the introduction video where I talked about the prerequisites to follow the course, then now is the time to know this. Unfortunately, I won't be able to stop all the time to explain how object-oriented programming works, okay? Because that will be annoying for some students who want me to get straight to the point. But it's important that I make this clear here from the start. If you don't understand object-oriented PHP, you can still watch the classes. But if you realize you can't understand it, I suggest you take a break, study the subject for a while, and then pick up where you left off. But anyway, I'll try to make the explanations as clear as possible, even for those who are not very familiar with this development pattern. The alternative will be to create our plugin without the use of classes in a single file, and that will be a mess. Just out of curiosity, I have here the first version I made for of this slideshow plugin, all in one file. Trust me, creating a plugin like this is a real nightmare. You get lost very easily, but with the classes and object-oriented programming, you can find your way around much easier. And our projects here will not even follow the MVC pattern to the letter. Another thing I have to say is that my way of creating the classes, instantiating the objects, organizing the files, etc. is just one of the possible ways. If you stop and analyze how other plugins are made, you'll find all kinds of different formulas. WordPress has more than 50,000 plugins in its directory, and you can bet there are thousands of different ways to do the same tasks sometimes. I even advise you to study how your favorite plugin was created after you finish this course. That's what I do myself to learn things I don't know how to do yet. You certainly learn a lot from it. Okay, so enough of this. The first thing we're gonna do today is create the main class of our plugin. So let's create a class called mv_slider. I usually also hand this class to a verification block like this. And I move this piece like this. This allows another developer later on, if they wish, to override this whole class in a different way. For example, using some themes functions.php file or using another plugin. By doing this, you're first checking if a class called mvSlider already exists in WordPress. If so, the system will use it and ignore this class here. This kind of thing makes your code very flexible. You can also use this technique for methods and other types of functions. It depends on your project, okay? For functions and methods, you can use function exists instead of class exists. At the end of this course, we'll have some specific lessons on how to make plugins more flexible. I will not return to this topic, but you should know that using function exists or class exists also helps make your plugin much more flexible. For now, we are just going to create the constructor method of the class. So let's bring it up right here. The constructor, as you know, is the method that is executed automatically when we instantiate a class object. So it will be empty for now. And down here, right after the code of the class, I'll be creating a block to instantiate the class object and run the plugin. Except I will do all this within a verification block too. So I'll do it like this. Except this time, we are checking if the plugin's class exists, not the other way around, like above. It is the opposite here. So if the class exists, that means we have something to do. Here inside, I'm going to create a variable to instantiate my class. I'll call it mv_slider. And do a new mv slider. The moment I use this new command and call the class along with these parentheses, it means that I'm automatically calling the constructor method of this class here. And then finally, whatever is happening here within the constructor is going to be executed. And this is what effectively makes the plugin work within an object-oriented project. If it was a single file plugin, we would only have a bunch of functions, each one doing one thing after the other. But it is much more difficult to organize it. This is much more elegant and cleaner. Well, that's it for this lesson. See you next time. Hey there! In today's lesson, we are going to start by defining some constants that will be used throughout the plugin. This is a relatively common thing in plugin development, and the goal is save time when it comes to setting paths or URLs that will be used all the time in the project, as well as other things like the plugin version number or the default value of some option used by the plugin, etc. Let's start by creating a method right here after our constructor. This method will be public and its name will be define_constants. The first constant that I want to define is the path to the plugins folder. The path is going to be used to help us load the PHP files that are going to be inside of these folders here. And we get the path into the file system using the plugin dir path function. And passing as a parameter this file here, the current file that we get with the magic constant file. Like this. But since it's a pain to write this all the time, let's define this value in a constant, okay? Here we pass the PHP define, and the name of the constant will be mv_slider_path. And its value is going to be the path returned by this plugin dir path. This will give you a value like the one you see on your screen. And the good thing is that the output already comes with a trailing slash. Let me duplicate this here, just to save us some time. The next constant I will define is called mv_slider_URL. And this will help us get the web address, the URL, to our plugins folder. This is necessary because some functions will require you to provide a web address and not the file system path, okay? For example, if you want to add a style sheet, you give the URL of the CSS file, not the path, all right? This has to be very clear, okay? The file system path is one thing, and the URL of the file is a different thing. It will be something like what you see on the screen here. To achieve that, we have the plugin dir URL function. We also pass the reference to the current file using file, the magic constant. So it will look like this, okay? There are other functions that you can use to get reference to files inside the plugin, like the plugin's URL function, plugin base name, and others. And I will leave the link to the documentation in the extra material of this lesson in case you want to read more about it. But later we'll come back to some of them. Finally, the last constant that I will define here in this file is for the plugin version. I will refer to it here as MV slider version. I'm going to set the version here as 1.0.0. This can be used to indicate, for example, the version of static resources such as JavaScript and CSS files. Now, in order for this method to be incorporated into the plugin for later use, I will add it here directly into the class constructor. To reference the class methods, I use the this variable, which is a reference to the class itself. I'm going to add a small arrow and call the method here. And that's it. This video was quite short this time. In the next one, we will resume creating some more important methods for our plugin. So, see you then. Welcome to another lesson. In this lesson, I will talk about 3 very important events that our plugin can trigger. They are activation, deactivation, and uninstallation. It is very interesting that your plugin performs some specific tasks in these 3 moments. Let's suppose that your plugin needs to create specific tables, create some post or a page or options with specific values to be used at the time of installation. You can define all this upon the activation. Likewise, you may want a certain type of post created by the plugin to no longer be available when it's deactivated. And what will come of the tables you created in the database with the options, with all the quote-unquote garbage that your plugin can leave after the user, let's say, the user doesn't want to hear from you anymore. In all of these situations, you can tell WordPress what to do. So it will provide you with 3 specific functions. Namely, register activation hook, which lets you specify a function that performs certain actions upon a plugin activation, register deactivation hook for deactivating a plugin, and register uninstall hook for to be used when the plugin is uninstalled. Well, the first step I'll take here is to create these 3 methods in the plugin's main class. So let's create a public function named activate. Empty for now. Public function deactivate. And public function uninstall. Same thing. Now, I will not hand these methods to the constructor of the class this time, but I could do that if I wanted to. Some plugins do that, okay? This time, I will be calling all of them here before I instantiate the class. To call the activation method, I will call the register activation hook function. And it requires 2 parameters. The first is the name of the file that will be used to name the hook that performs the plugin activation. During activation, an action hook will be created that starts with the name activate_something. In our case, the name will be activate_mv-slider/mv-slider.php, as you see it on your screen. To do this, we can again use the magic constant file. Just to refer to this file here, the file we are working on now. And the second parameter is the function or method. To reference a method inside a class, we pass an array. If you want, you can use the new PHP syntax for arrays, okay? I'm more used to this one here. And here inside the array, I pass the class name. And then the method name, all as strings. We're gonna do this kind of thing several times later in the course. Now for the next two events, I'm gonna copy this twice. The deactivation function is called register deactivation hook. And here I pass the deactivate method. This will create an action hook with the name you see on your screen when you deactivate the plugin. Finally, register uninstall hook. Passing the uninstall method. One interesting detail is that the second parameter of this function must be a static function or method. The idea is that you don't have to be forced to instantiate an object to have access to this method or function. In fact, this is what a static method is for. You can invoke it outside the class without needing an object. So in this case, we'll need to turn this method here into a static method. To do this, we just have to put the word static here, like this. I can do the same thing for the other methods, no problem. I think I'm gonna do that. Another valid option is to create a file in the root of your plugin called uninstall.php. It should have this name, okay? In that file, you first check if the constant wp uninstall plugin is defined, and then specify the tasks to be executed one by one. If you want to know more about this, you can find more information in the link in the extra resources of this lecture, alright? Well, what should I put inside each of these methods? Let's start here with the activate method. For this plugin, I will create a custom post type, if you can remember. So this post type will be used to create each of the slides of the slideshow, as described in the first lesson of this section. But it turns out that WordPress cannot immediately recognize the links that our post type uses to display some of the content. In this particular plugin, that's not too critical because we're not going to have archive pages. Just one parenthesis. Later, I will also explain what archive pages are, okay? What happens when WordPress can't recognize the structure of these links is that you end up seeing a 404 error page when you access them. This is very common in archive pages, as I just said. To solve this, we can tell WordPress to manually recreate the site's permanent links. You simply go to the Settings menu, Permalinks option, and click again on the Save Changes button. And this will recreate the values found in the Rewrite Rules field of the WP Options table. But of course, that's not a task for the plugin user to do. You can do this automatically using your plugin activation method. There are two ways to do this. One is by calling the flush rewrite rules function. And the other is directly erasing the values in the table record. To do that, you can use the update option function, passing the name of the field in the options table. In the case, rewrite rules. And passing an empty string. This will update the value of the table with an empty value, which is equivalent to deleting the values in the field. But don't worry, because those values will be restored as soon as you, for example, save a post. The only thing is that this cannot be done all the time because it is a very costly process. So I recommend you to do it only at those specific moments. For example, when you activate a plugin, if necessary, of course, and then also when you deactivate it. In my experience, deleting the values from the table on activation works better than calling this function here. I still can't really explain why. So I'm going to remove this first option here. And I'll just work with this one here, at least in my activation method. Well, I like to show things in practice, so I'll go ahead and open the table here for you to see it. This is the field I was talking about, and these are the values. Now I'm gonna activate our plugin. And when I go back to the table, the values are gone, okay? Great. Now if I create a simple post here in WordPress, so let's create it. Back to the table. As you can see, the values have been recreated. For our deactivate method, I would do the same thing, except this time I can call the flush rewrite rules function. From my tests, it works fine here. And for now, the uninstall method will be empty because we don't have anything to delete yet, alright? But for sure, there will be some stuff going on here later. Well guys, that's it for this video. Next time we will start creating the custom post type for our slides. So, see you there. Hey there! Well, throughout these lessons you've heard me talk about custom post types, but maybe some of you don't have much idea of what I mean by that. Imagine if you wanted to use WordPress to create a post with some sort of a field that you cannot find in a regular post. You could start thinking about using a regular WordPress post by going to Posts, Add New, but then a problem comes up. How are you going to add a type of field that is not available in the post? Well, WordPress even has a feature that allows you to create custom fields. These are very useful key value fields, but they are not always enough. Another problem will arise when you want to create a loop to display only these different posts you created using a standard post. It can be difficult for you to, for example, distinguish between your modified posts and those that are ordinary WordPress posts. The best solution would be if you could put each thing in its place. To solve this, WordPress allows you to register new post types besides the ones that come with the regular installation. To show this, I'm gonna visit my PHP My Admin once again. If we open the WP post table and group the records here by post type, I'm gonna do this and run a quick SQL command. We'll see that a typical installation comes with at least these types here. We've got attachment, like images for example. There's one that is not in the list here called Nav Menu item that is used for each menu items. Page, look at that. Did you know that pages are also a post type? Post, of course, and revision, which are for each post revision. All the others shown here are usually created by plugins and are called custom post types, also known by the abbreviation CPT. In the course, I will refer to them by both of these names, okay? When you register a CPT for your plugin, you get a lot of stuff from WordPress for free. Your CPT has access to the WordPress post table, this one here, every item you save will be stored in this table without you having to worry so much about security issues. It also has access to the post metadata table, which is this one called WP Post Meta. Except here, you need to worry about validating and sanitizing information, okay? You also get access to a separate screen in the admin where you can create your own modified posts. That's really good. You can control the loop to show only posts from your CPT. What else? You also get access to the WordPress template system and can create different archive templates, different single post templates as well. You can also take advantage of the WordPress caching system. You also get access to the post revision system for free. This one you see here. Not to mention things that we can take for granted. For example, hold on a second, let me show you. Do you know that little table with a list of posts? That's right. You don't want to create this on your own from scratch. In other words, all those features that a native WordPress post has to offer, but with the benefit that you can customize it. So you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Of course, you can, if you want, create a separate table to store all data from your post type, but it's not worth it. You lose a lot of things. You lose a lot of benefits. I know this because I already tried to do this, and it's just not worth it. Well, if you don't understand what CPTs are by now in my explanation, let's start building our own and you'll be surprised at how powerful they are. Let's start by opening our project. And here in the post types folder, we will be creating a PHP class file. Its name will be class.mv-slider-cpt.php. It's a class file. Here I open the PHP tags. We're going to start by creating a class named mv_slider_post_type. And I will give you the possibility to override the class as well. I'll hand it to a verification block, the same way we did for the plugin's main class. Let's create the class constructor method. So what is the idea here? Well, the idea will be later on to have an instance of this class here building to the constructor of the plugin's main class. The main class will call this one and it will run it automatically. But I will not explain this yet because it might confuse some of you. So let's just stick to this class for now. So let's move on. What do I need to register a CPT in WordPress? Well, the process of registering a custom post type involves an action hook called init. So check it out. This is the first time you're going to use that knowledge we got at the beginning of the course. First of all, I need a function to be fired with the help of the add action. Remember, add action accepts at least two parameters. The first is the name of the action hook, and the second is a callback function. Since we're inside a class, we pass the name of a method instead of a simple function. But in practice, functions and methods are like the same thing. So let's first create our method here. It will be public. And the name will be createPostType. Now I can't simply include the add action anywhere in the PHP class. Do you remember that in the example of the action hooks in previous videos, I put the add action anywhere in the functions.php file and it still worked? Well, within a class that's different, okay? The correct place to do this is within the constructor. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to call the add action. And I will pass as first parameter the init action hook. Now to reference a function that is inside a class, that is a method, I have to pass an array. And inside this array, I specify the class where the method is and its name. As the method is from this class, I refer to it using this variable, and then pass its name here, the method name, okay? It is pretty much the same thing we did before to set the activation, deactivation, and uninstallation methods, remember? The only thing different here is that we're inside the class, and that's why we use this variable. Well, this isn't doing anything very useful yet. It's just organizing things for now. Next class, I will come back and we'll finally bring our first CPT to life. So, see you then. Hello! In this lesson, we will finally create our first CPT. So, continuing from where we left off, to register the post type itself, I need a WordPress function called register post type. And of course, I'm gonna work with it here inside my method. So I call it here. I left it for this lecture because we will need a whole video just to talk about it. But that will only happen this time, okay? The next time we register a CPT in this course, it won't take so long because I won't explain everything again. First, this function accepts two parameters. The first is the key for our CPT. This key can be no longer than 20 characters and can contain only lowercase alphanumeric characters, hyphens, or underscores. In my case, the key for the CPT will be mv-slider. The second parameter is an array with a lot of arguments. I will try to explain the main ones to you here. The first argument I will use here is called label, which is the name of our CPT. Here you can have spaces, special characters, okay? In our case, it is just slider. The next one is description. I can put whatever I want in here too. I'll just go with sliders. The next one is labels. This is basically an array of strings that is going to be used for various tasks involving your post type in the WordPress admin. For example, the text that's available in the CPT menu when you add a new post. There are many options and none of them are required. If I leave this array empty, my post type will inherit the same labels used in regular WordPress posts or pages. If you want to see a complete list of these labels, I'll leave you with the WordPress documentation page that has all of them, okay? I'm gonna work with just two of these labels. The first one is name. This will be sliders. And this is generally in the plural form, okay? And the other one is singular name. It's just the CPT name in the singular. Slider. Now from this point on, we've got some more complicated arguments. But so that you can see something in the admin, I will pass the first one here and instantiate the class in the main class constructor as explained in the previous video. The first in this list of more complex arguments that we're going to pass here is called public. This tells you whether your CPT will be available for public access on the back end as well as on the front end. By default, the value of this argument here is false. There are times when this is useful because you don't really want anyone to have access to it. For example, WordPress post revisions are not public. You don't have a specific menu in WordPress to see the revisions. In our case, the CPT will be public, so the value is true. But this still won't guarantee that your CPT will be displayed in admin, okay? The reason is that this class here hasn't been instantiated yet. We just have an abstract idea of the class for now. To bring it to life, we need a real object. We could do that here at the end of the file, but we'll do it there in the constructor of the plugin's main class to make it more organized. Well, but first I have to fix a little mistake I made here. This is not like this. And done. Now it's correct. So let's save it here. I'm gonna come back here to the main class of the plugin. First, let's require the class file where the CPT has been registered using a require once here in the constructor. We can use that constant specially created for calling our PHP files. This one here. And we concatenate here with the file path. And now down here, I can instantiate the class. This will help us call the constructor method of this class, which in turn, let's go back in the file. It will register the CPT using the init hook. Now, if we check the admin, oops, I think the file name is wrong. Let's go back and fix that. Of course, the folder name is missing. And it won't work like this, Marcelo. Now it is. Now we have our CPT created. Cool, right? It is already working quite well. But let's add some more support here to make it even better. By the way, the next argument I can use here is called supports. So let's set this argument to. This is about the resources that are going to be available in the edit area of your CPT. By default, if you don't pass anything here, your editing area will show at least both the title and the editor area. Let me create a new slider for you to have an idea. Well, first of all, look how cool this is. We are not creating another post nor a page. We are creating a different kind of post called slider. This will be used to create each item of the slideshow. That's the idea. Well, you see, I have at least two items here, the title area and the editor. But we also need a place to add a background image to the slider. And we can achieve this with the featured image field. So back to the code. Here under supports, I can open an array and enter everything I want, for example, title, editor, and thumbnail, which is that area to upload an image. Save in here. Now back to the slider. I have here a place to upload an image. One detail is that this option will only appear here if the theme also supports post thumbnails. If that's not the case, no deal. It will not display here. You can add other items, so please take a look at the WordPress docs to know what else can be used, okay? I'll leave the link there also in the extra material. Let's go to the next one. The next one is hierarchical. Its default value is false. When you set it to true, you create a parent and a child post relationship. This is a WordPress behavior that allows you to nest a page on top of each other. But this will only work if you pass the page attributes value here under supports. Let me give you an example. I'm gonna add page attributes under support. And here it should be true. Let's go to the admin. Let me create two sliders just for the sake of testing here. You guys are already seeing something different here, but let me go back to the list of slides. If I quick edit the posts, I can choose one of the items here to be the parent. Actually, I can put it in reverse order, so it's even better for you to see it. So the parent will be this one. Do you see it? This means a parent-child relationship exists. Well, that was just an example. I'm gonna undo this. My post type is not gonna be hierarchical, okay? So here, I'm gonna set it to false. Next one is going to be show UI. This argument is related to the public argument. It is usually true and follows the value given in public. If it is true, it will show the post's user interface, the post's UI, that is the edit area, the post list table, etc. If it's false, you'll not even be able to fill in the post fields. Again, you can ask me, what is this for? Well, it is the same case with the post revisions. They are not public and don't have a proper user interface, a UI, so it does serve a purpose. Next is show in menu. Here you decide if you want to show a custom post type related menu item or not in the WordPress admin. This will depend on the value you pass here in show UI. If it is set to false, the menu item will not show up either. That's because the menu item is part of the user interface, right? And here is an interesting thing. Later, I'll come back here and set it to false. For now, it will be true. You'll see later that I will create a different menu for our plugin, so the CPT menu will not be visible. Later, you understand, okay? The next one is menu position. Here you can specify in which position the menu item will appear. You can use the values that are showing up on your screen. In the case of our custom post type, I will give the value 5, which corresponds to a position below the post menu item. But as we will hide the menu later, it makes no difference here. Okay, let's go to the next one. Show in admin bar. The admin bar is that little black bar at the top of WordPress. Let me show you. This guy over here. The value is actually set together with the value of this previous argument, show in menu. If it is set to false, then nothing will show up in the bar that refers to our custom post type. In turn, you remember that show in menu is related to this other one, show UI. When you look at it carefully, it makes a lot of sense. I can set this to true. And we'll see the slider item there in the admin bar when we hover the mouse over the new item. You'll also see this same option right there in the front end. Want to see it? Look at it here. And if I check the front end, I also have it here. Let's go to the next one. Show in Nav Menus. This one is quite interesting. It defines if the items you create for your CPT will be available or not to add to a WordPress menu. I'll show you. I'm gonna set this here to true. And when I hover over the appearance menu, menus item, by the way, if it's not showing up here, you can click on screen options and then select this, okay? And look here, the items we've just created. With this, I can add these items here to the menus as if they were common pages or posts. Let's go one more. Can export. This will define if this post type, in this case the sliders we're going to create, can be exported by the WordPress Export tool. In case you've never heard of that tool, I'll show you. Let's go over here under Tools, Export, and this one is the WordPress Exporter. And look at this, sliders. This is very interesting because it allows you to import all the data from your WordPress post types into another site. A lot of people use this to avoid having to recreate everything from scratch when they create a whole new site and want to reuse content from an old site. And there is an import tool that can also restore the post content. This is a very nice feature to have in a plugin. Back to the editor. By default, I forget to mention, the value here is true. That's why that option was there for us. The next one here is has archive. This one is of extreme importance. If this is set to false, you won't be able to create pages with a list of items in your CPT. WordPress calls those lists archive templates. In this plugin specifically, we will not need archive templates, okay? That's because it will act only as a slideshow, so I don't need a special page that has a list of slides. This will make more sense in the other plugins we're going to create later in this course. But I will set it to true here for now, just so you can see one thing. If you go back here to the menu, now if I go over here to sliders, I click here on the View All tab, I can add a sort of general CPT archive page. Check it out. This will help you view all the posted items at once, just like a blog page. Well, that's what an archive page is all about. We will use all that later on in the course. Very interesting, huh? But for now, I will set my argument value to false. The next one is exclude from search. By default, this comes as false. What will happen is that when someone performs a search on your site, they will see your CPT among the search results as well. In this plugin, that is not relevant, so I will set it to false. You're not going to have an archive page, right? So it doesn't matter to us. The next one is publicly queryable. Well, this says whether queries can be performed on the front end using your post type or not. In the case of this plugin, it makes no difference if the value is true or false. But if your plugin has archive pages, for example, if you need to open each post individually in the front end for viewing, it is good to set this to true. Next one is show in REST. Well, I won't have time to explain what the REST API is right now. Maybe this subject can be covered later in a future version of this course, but just so you know, there is a very powerful API in WordPress called REST. It is basically used to get information from posts and other objects in JSON format. It is very useful, for example, for you to pull data from one WordPress site into a second site, or even into a non-WordPress site because of the JSON data format, which is universal. But it also happens to be used internally within WordPress itself. It also happens that the block editor is all built using the REST API. So if you want your CPT to be displayed within the block editor interface, you have to pass this argument here as true. By doing so, let's check it out in the admin. There you go. Now my CPT is already displaying in the block editor and I'm no longer using the classic editor. Cool, huh? The appearance has changed. So let's go back to the editor. And the last argument I will pass here is called menu icon. This refers to the icon that appears next to the plugin name in the admin menu. The easiest way to add an icon is to set the dash icons library, which is already natively supported by WordPress. You can see a list of these icons by visiting this page here. Here you would choose an icon, click on it, and then copy this information here. There are other ways to add icons. For example, you might want to add your own icon, and I will leave the link to the documentation that has some examples of use, okay? But for time reasons, I won't go into details here in the course. That's enough for now. There are other arguments that you can use to register your CPT, but they are not so widely used. Generally, the ones we have gone over here will do the trick. Well, folks, that's it. So we have created our first CPT, our custom post type. It is all set up here in the backend and ready to be used. Just to finish off, what you can do is add one more line here in the deactivation function of the plugin. Let's go over there and say the following. Unregister post type MV-slider. This will do the opposite of what we have done so far. That is, when I deactivate the plugin, my CPT, whose key is this one, will be unregistered, okay? So that's it. If I want now, I can add some slides and then work with them. Next lesson, I will show you what I did to test it, and we'll start a new subject. See you then.
So are you enjoying learning? I hope so. Well, but this is just the start, okay? As I said in the beginning, there are 15 hours of course. There is much more in the complete course. There are about 100 lessons with content that you won't find anywhere else. And the best of all is that you have a 30-day guarantee and my exclusive support. Got any questions? I'll be there to help you. So what are you waiting for? There are already more than 20,000 students in my courses and many people who are following a successful career working with WordPress. So come and join us, give a new direction to your career. Enroll today using the discount coupon link in the video description. That's it. See you in the course.